Now we are recording. Right. Welcome everyone to this core interim meeting. I'm Marco Tiloca, co-chairing with Jaime Jimenez. Not well applies. Please get familiar with them if you're not already. Okay, so we have had some kind of agenda bashing already, and Michael, you wanted to mention something about stateless. Please go ahead.
Hi. So I just pasted 2 links into the notes. There's one pull request relating to automatic key management that I would like to get a little more review on. This is issue number 11. And then we have 5 items that are issues that were raised that I believe are in various states of won't fix. And so I would like to also get some comments about that. One of them, number 8, is related to the pull request. And the other is probably could be closed. So basically, I just need a little bit more help to close these, to just say this is what I've done is okay. And then I will post a new version of the draft this afternoon, I hope. And that's about it, really. Do you want me to share any of these issues? If you want, does people want to have a gander at them here, or?
Please go ahead.
Okay, so application window. So this is the pull request that's open that has to do with automatic key management. So what I think happened is that there was there's 2 parts. First of all, this relates to the fact that you may want to encrypt you probably want to encrypt the token that you are sending out, such that you can recognize it coming back with it while keeping it private and integral. And there was a reference to some ways of doing things, and this somehow wound up with a reference to key management, and there's no key management involved because no key agreement is necessary, because there's no second party involved. It's just a single party makes up a key and encrypts stuff. So that's what this text kind of changes significantly. And there's just the question of how often you need to rekey to avoid reusing nonces. That's really the major part. And that is actually dealt with this text with a reference to 8613 sender sequence number. It's the same problem. If you do the same thing, use the same sequence numbers, you're probably all good. And then I had some other text here about how many outstanding things you might need and how big a window you might need. And so that may require a little bit of someone to sanity check my math and assumptions here, that essentially, if you're sending out things that, you can expect, and you expect to have a response within, say, 2 seconds, which seems very, very generous, that the number of requests outstanding determines your replay window. And I assume this is like an IPsec-like replay window where you have some set of bits that you set, and then you have a low water count mark for that. But you could implement something simpler even if you wanted to for that. So I'm just really looking for some review of this text and an endorsement or 2, and then I will post the document. issues. I just closed two as we were talking about. This one relates to what we just talked about. This one we think won't fix. And this is some strange discussion about whether or not we're updating 7252, which this document does. So I don't know what the discussion was really about. That's about it.
Right. Can I go back to the key management thing?
Yep.
I reviewed an earlier version of this.
Mm-hmm.
I see that you now have started to put in some math there, which I would have to check. My knee-jerk reaction is that it's entirely wrong.
Okay.
But I have to read it in detail. So
specifically this about the replay window, this part here?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I could accept it's completely wrong. So that's what I want to get right here.
Right. So I think this is maybe what people should focus on when reviewing this, whether the advice that we are giving here actually is right and is actionable. And yeah, I'm not sure, but I have to read it more than 30 seconds.
Sure. So that's what I'm looking for is somewhat longer thinking about what this means, and then whatever changes you think we need to do. I won't take any more time.
Any more comments or objections? Okay, Michael, since you mentioned about resubmitting even this afternoon, that'll be great. Jaime and I had a chat, and considering the work you've put on this, we think you'd be fair and good if you want to add yourself as second co-author of the document, if you're fine with it.
Yeah, at least I need to do that to make the submitting easier, so I'll do that. Okay, sure.
Thanks a lot for taking this, Michael.
Okay, great.
Okay, we can move to the next item. I understand John will show the slides by himself. John, if there are updated slides compared to the ones in the data tracker, please push this latest version later on.
Sure, no, there's no difference. What's in the data tracker is what I've got here.
Thank you. Please try to be within 60 minutes or so. We want to reserve 10 to 15 minutes in the end for one more topic, a point on the business directory. Thank you.
Okay, so I need Okay, so just talking about the alternative blockwise transfer options for faster transmission of data, in particular in a lossy type network environment. So just go through requirements reminder, what we did in the -01 updates, some things I observed as part of the implementation, which raises some questions about what is the best way to move forward and what's the next steps. Okay, so just as a reminder, we want to be able to transmit data faster rather than waiting for the latency turnaround of send and some sort of ACK coming back, then the next packet and going on so forth. Rather, be able to send a block of data, but obviously subject to congestion control, which is covered there in the draft. One of the challenges we have is that we are likely to be working in lossy type environments because we are moving forward to mitigate some sort of DDoS attack, and because the DDoS attacks are taking place, it's likely to be lossy. So we need to have some good recovery mechanism for blocks that get lost if you're sending them out as a big chunk. We also need the requirement to be able to just send unidirectional data in the same way that we can send a single non-packet. And if we don't get an answer back, it's not the end of the world. We want to be able to send out a set of non-blocks to comprise of a non-body, and we don't necessarily need to worry about getting a response back. And the reason for that is that, again, with DDoS attacks, is that you're likely to have a pipe flooded somewhere. And so you may have traffic going in one direction, but unlikely to come and return in the other. The faster blocks, quick blocks, are modeled on block 1, block 2, but they are not an addition. Sorry, they're not a replacement for them. They're an addition to. If there are any questions as we go down here, just please say. Okay, so just general updates to the -01. We updated the applicability scope just to make it more relevant. We moved away from having our own error code and using piggybacking on 408 instead. We've renamed the options to quick block 1 and 2 rather than block 3 and 4, so that quick block 1 models block 1 and quick block 2 models block 2. The options are marked unsafe and caching behavior is updated, so that basically we're not expecting the cache to be able to cache individual blocks as things move forward. We've moved the congestion control text into a new dedicated section to break that specifically out. We were fairly normative in the use of tokens, fairly prescriptive. They're now just pulled out into a separate section, and it's more generic, the text that's in the various places, and just other kind of edit typos, all those kind of things. So in terms of moving forward to the actual implementation that I did, I'm using libcoap as a base, which I'm relatively familiar with. And I have raised PR 554 to move all the block 1, block 2 handling out of the application layer down into libcoap. So it's up to libcoap to do all the recovery, if necessary, on block 1, block 2 operations, and only pass the large item of data up to the application, or if the application wants it, just the individual blocks, but they've already been checked out and recovered, etc. And then on top of that, having done that work, I then added in the support for the quick block 1 and 2, based on the fact that everything's just down there in the libcoap area. So all we just need to do is say, well, we're happy to have block 1, block 2, and let libcoap get on with it and check with the remote end whether things work or not. And at some point, when we're happy with that code, it will then become also a PR into libcoap. Some observations of from the implementation. At the moment, an environment can support either quick block 1 or quick block 2, or neither of them, or all of them. This gave me some challenges with the fact that we could support only one of the two. When we come to find out whether the remote end likes us or not, it's a critical option. We get some sort of response coming back. But it then is unclear if we're sending both block 1 and block 2 out in that initial packet. The response that comes back, was it referring to the block 1? Was it referring to the block 2? Unless we update the spec to say it's either both of quick block 1 and 2, or neither of block 1 and 2 are supported. Just makes life a lot easier, in particular because it's very difficult to work out what critical option is not liked by the remote end. Just the standard 7252 just says something in the diagnostic payload. It doesn't talk about formatting. A non-package just returns an empty reset. And just libcoap happens to return the bad critical option as an option, but I don't think that's standard across all the implementations, so we can't rely on that kind of thing. So kind of a suggestion question for mutual support is that we either both quick block 1 and 2 have to be implemented, or neither of them. And are there any thoughts on that?
Christian Amses, do you expect that the quick block 1 and 2 options are supported on every resource on the same server the same way?
No. Basically, for server, if he sees a quick block 1 or quick block 2 coming in, he knows that particular functionality is enabled by the client. He has the ability to say, I like you or I don't like you, as a critical option. But there can be sessions that are coming from client A and client B. Client A doesn't use quick block, client B does. As far as the server is concerned, the individual sessions will be treated as appropriate using either the old block or the quick block.
I was rather thinking the other way around, a single client interacting with different resources on the same server.
Okay, so are they, if we're talking about the same session or different sessions? If you're talking about different sessions,
what is a session?
A session is a connection to an endpoint coming from an endpoint that's got a particular source port.
Okay.
Typically in our environment, that will be a DTLS session as underlying it all.
Or put differently, is the client expected to, if the client discovers the support for quick block 1 and 2, is it supposed to remember that about that server or about that resource in general? I mean, when is this even so what's the case in which this actually is a decision to make? Because
okay, so
I originally thought that this is something like the client knows that the server supports this and it just goes ahead and does it because it's part of that particular application.
Yeah, well, okay, so we're not mandating quick block for the DOTS type environment. So it could be that the DOTS client has it and the DOTS server does not, depending on manufacturers and all the rest of it. So that's why we just need to see whether the remote end likes it or not. And if it doesn't, fine, we just say carry on with the original block stuff. But if it does like it, we then use the block stuff for faster transmission and recovery, etc.
But then supporting them as a single thing or not seems to make sense to me, because yeah, if you start with it and fail, then you fail over to traditional blockwise transfer and mix. I mean, if only one of them would be supported, that would probably incur mixing block types, and that's a can of worms I don't think we want to open.
I mean, I agree with you. It's at the moment, I say the speckers, you can do either of them, but I think it's got to be mandated that you support both or neither. Okay, thanks, Christian. Okay, congestion control. Some things came out of it. So at the moment, we have in place that every max payloads, every 10 packets by default, we wait for an ACK timeout before we then send the next 10 if there's a fairly large set of data to pass backwards and forwards. We have the possibility of using con every max payload just to reduce the turnaround times, and that works pretty well. But that does not work. The con fails if there's unidirectional traffic loss, likelihood of that. But the non-environment just always, the non-types traffic always waits for the ACK timeout before the next packet set. So the 10th packet or the max payload packet, if that's a non, it'll always wait for the ACK timeout. Now that slows things down quite considerably because we're waiting the 2 seconds. And we also can't assume that max payloads is configured because it's a default at both ends to do a trigger. So we can't just rely on the 10th packet. Therefore, we can go faster because we're sending some sort of response back because we know it's the 10th packet. Also tied up with this is if we are probing for whether quick block 1 or 2 is sent, I can only send out the first block and wait for a response. I can't send out max payloads and then suddenly get back 10, we don't like you, critical options. So in the startup environment, the first time we try anything out, I can only send a singular packet. So we can't just rely on that for some sort of trigger. So thinking about this, the suggestion is something in the max payload packet to indicate that the other end, if it can, sends back a response. If that response gets lost, we still wait for the ACK timeout. If not, we can then carry on transmitting faster. So one thought, and this is not entirely what it is, so it's just taking the standard block format of num, m, and szx, add in an r bit, and if the r bit is set, then we then expect the remote end to send back some sort of immediate response. Quick block will be 231, continue. Block 2 will be an issue of a get. So does that kind of thing work for people or not?
We already have something for that. That's no response. So I think that what should happen here is that I don't really know what the best default is for a block 1 transfer, but you can control whether the server should respond to that non-request by adding the no response option, and that option would then be sent by the client every max payloads to indicate that the server it's asking for a response, even if it's
okay. So yeah, okay. I had a quick look at that. So basically, we're saying the first 9 packets need to have no response set, and the 10th packet not. rather than the 10th packet has got it and the 9 previous don't.
What you could, if that's a matter of traffic that you don't want to have, it would be an option to say that a quick one transfer implicitly has an implicit default value for no response, and if you do want to have a response, then set no response with an explicit value of, I think it's 0. That indicates that you want a response in all cases.
Okay. Yep, certainly that would work, and then that would work in both quick block 1 and quick block 2. Yep, I will work with that. Thanks very much for that. Okay, so the quick block 2 implementation was the easiest to implement. The size required for missing blocks as options was difficult to compute. So we're just looking at when we're building up the error response, the 408 response, not the 408, the response that's coming back and saying, I need some more. Yeah, it's a 408. The response that comes back says, this is the list of missing blocks. We have a challenge of easily computing the size of the packet to hold all the missing blocks. And it's very dependent on the actual size of the block.num value. So the suggestion is we just limit the numbers of the quick block options to max payloads, which then also nicely ties up with what a server can send at once. And I'm pretty confident, I have to double check the math, but I'm pretty confident even with worst case block nums, we'll get all that into a single diagnostic 408 response packet. Does that kind of idea work, or have I missed something?
It's not fully clear to me why you have to calculate that, other than for the sending side to assemble the packet. And as long as there is no requirement that all the missing blocks are in that response, why does this need to be agreed on?
Okay, well, it just happens to be within libcoap is that you build your PDU and you then try and send it in. It then chokes because it's too large.
Yeah.
Rather than, as you're building the PDU, it computes the size and returns an error you can't add in the next one.
But this is something more implementation specific, and if in that particular implementation you take the PDU as long as you think for that particular situation is good, for example, to get all those max payloads in there, then you put in as many numbers as you get, and if you are still missing blocks, you can still ask for them later when you're getting the next blocks around.
Okay, so a secondary challenge in that is that the CDDL is defining an array in CBOR, and the array size is defined as a count. So you then, if you say, oh, well, I'm going to add in X missing blocks, then the array size for that is going to be X. But if you can only get a subset of X in, then you've got to go back and recompute what the array size is when you build the CBOR. So
did you consider using a CBOR sequence?
To an extent, yes, but it still requires something that says, well, it effectively ends up as an array. It just is, there are this number of elements that follow.
Okay, well, you could use an indefinite length encoding, if that helps.
Okay, I was not aware of that, but that may be a way forward then. It just is, I ran into a kind of a circular loop here and get it working and getting stuff through.
So what you can do is that as long as your number of elements is less than 23, I think 23 is the magic limit, then you can start writing the array and put the number in at the end. But again, that's more of an implementation thing.
Yep, that certainly would work. Yeah, so it's an implementation thing, but we may just have to make a suggestion that there may be a challenge here. Within the text. Okay, great. Thanks very much. Okay, so quick block 1. So I did struggle with the CDDL, and thanks, Carsten, for your help and feedback and working out. I believe I've got it right now. We just had to add some CBOR knowledge into libcarp. We couldn't just assume that it could pull in a CBOR library, but the actual CBOR knowledge required within libcarp is very, very small. It's a significant subset of what's required for CBOR. So that wasn't that difficult to do. The next quick block implementation challenge I had was tracking tokens. So if we're sending a max payload of packets out at once, and they all have unique tokens following the current rules, we then have to track that max payloads of tokens and then garbage collect when everything kind of gets itself sorted out. And we certainly cannot rely on the max payload packet may not arrive at the target end. So the response that we get back from the server may be against a previous token. So we have to maintain all those different tokens again down within libcoap, so we can then just see what's going on, so we can pass the correct original token back to any application should he need to know what's going on there. So it's tracking tokens. I haven't really done that code because it just needs a lot of it, and just trying to think of, are there any ways of getting around this? And one of the thoughts had that we have an associated response, as in observing, when traffic is coming back from the server, and they all have the same token. Is it worth considering an associated request for quick block 1 where all the tokens can be the same? There's obviously a caveat that, if there's any retry request, we'll definitely use a different token. So I don't know if there are any thoughts on that. I also have another alternative, which is post this slide, which I'll come up in a minute, but just want to hear your feedback on this one.
I think that if you go that way, it will need a lot more thought with respect to what it means for other associated responses. So if there is an easier way, and if it's not the thing that's coming up in the next slide, I can suggest one, then it's probably better to take that.
Okay, and I'll hear your suggestion. I say I have one. It's not on the next slide. I didn't add it into the slide because I only thought of it this morning.
So did you consider computer tokens?
Computer tokens, sorry?
Where the token is a function of something that's constant for the whole thing, plus something that varies in a well-defined way, so you don't actually have to remember all these tokens?
Yes. Okay. So my solution was that the bottom 32 bits would be a token, and the top 32 bits would be the block number. And then, so I'm then using up to the full 8 bytes of the token. I know that there is stateless token coming downstream, but I didn't particularly want to go there just yet. So in terms of the computed one, I would have the bottom 32 bits are the tokens to track, if you like, and then the top 32 bits would just be whatever the current block number is, and we can then just do some math when we look at the token. I know that tokens are supposed to be opaque.
Yes, the receiver should not.
So if we're quick block, we're sending it to the server. The server is totally opaque, and he sends back whatever token he wants to match against. But the client, in sending it, knows that I generated a token that is the first 32 bits is the token number, and the top 32 bits is the block number or something.
Yeah, my assumption here is that the server never needs to actually keep a track of tokens because it kind of responds in an instance.
Yes.
So there is no tracking at the server. The client side, by building the tokens in a specific way, you can make tracking them much easier.
Yeah. I think that probably is the better way to go. As I say, I thought about that this morning, and you certainly came up with the same answer, so that's brilliant.
Great.
Great stuff. Great minds think alike. Thank you. So really, it's just moving on to the next step. So we'll update O2 with what we followed through this discussion. I'm sure there's going to be a couple other tweaks, maybe come out somewhere else. Update the implementation so that we make sure that we haven't forgotten something, that it all works and viable, and then go for working group last call. So
I missed part of the discussion. I like the plan. I missed part of the discussion because I had some weird WebEx audio problem.
I think it was slide 6, at the end of slide 6, in case you want to show to the others, right?
Yeah, it was simply one slide earlier, actually. It was even one earlier than that. Yes, no, 5. No, 4. I'm sorry. I have a little problem here, which is calling the option quick block creates 2 problems. One is the IETF has a major standardization effort that is called quick, without a K.
Right.
And if we want to create confusion, because people will be starting to think about CoAP over quick and all that at some point. If we want to create confusion, then we give the thing a name that sounds like quick. So that's my one problem.
Okay, so how about something like fast?
Yeah, that's my other problem. Actually, I think the distinguishing property here is not so much the speed, but the robustness. So we are doing all this because it needs to work in a environment that has some problems. So maybe having a word that expresses that robustness would be better than replacing it by another synonym for fast.
Okay. Certainly the word robust works immediately thinking about it, but then people will say, well, this is the alternative to use for the old block 1, block 2, which is not necessarily the case.
Well, it is an alternative.
It is an alternative, but they just say, well, forget block 1, block 2, we'll go with the robust version because it implies it's better. And then some people say, well, why didn't you come out with the biz for the 7959 or whatever it is, the blocking one?
Yeah.
That's actually a good question anyway. I'm going to concur with Karsten. This is Michael Richardson, that the naming is unfortunate. But on top of that, if I can jump in, because I think you had a second point, Karsten, there are no references to quick QI without the K in the document. I only really hadn't paid much attention to it till today. And the quick people did it looks very similar in lots of ways. And so some contrast to it and some reference to their congestion mechanism might would probably be prudent, because if not, the transport people are going to ask us to do that anyway. That's going to be the first question as well. Sir, sounds like quick. Have you reviewed all of the congestion control issues in quick?
Right. Thanks, guys.
And I yeah, I mean, it can be me saying it now or someone else in 6 months, right? So that's, I think, the major thing. And a question of why we're not doing block BIS is a good question, and probably should be dealt with. What is the use case where block mode is perfectly fine, and you've restricted it to DDoS or DDoSes and dots mode, and that's very interesting. But so figuring out what it's useful might help us name it better. I'm not fond of robust either, but maybe we can come up with something else.
I have another word that I can suggest. So I have a synonym dictionary on my laptop, like every decent person should have, and that suggests tough. Tough block.
It's good. I'm seeing visions of the Clockwork Orange movie myself, but bunch of toughs on the block, right? Beat you up.
Okay, so maybe a word like resilient.
Yeah, that's the long version. So durable, resilient, tough, hard-wearing, long-lasting, sturdy, strong. But tough, I think, has both the robustness in it and the bullying part, which is really an important property.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but we can take this offline. It's definitely a bike shed, but I wanted to point out that Quick might have some implications.
Thank you.
On the distinguishing it from the regular block-wise transfer that Michael brought up, I'd like to throw in that the thing that traditional block can do, and this, if it can, it's not thought through, and it would need a lot of thought, is working both with atomic operations and random access. So this is, and this has implications for the proxying of it.
Yeah, this basically doesn't like random access.
Yeah.
So traditional block mode would let me get a byte 2000 of an object without getting the rest of it, and this
Correct.
won't let me do it.
Correct.
That's an interesting point.
Well, you could do it, but it gets messy.
I even think that this can, as it is now, this can be a very solid base for 7959 BIS if we were to do one at any time. It will just take some time to get the messiness and the precise implications of random access out.
Sure. Okay, Carsten, you had a second point?
Not really.
No.
Well, I missed another point, but I need to read up what you did there.
Okay.
So let's not redo that.
John, just a small comment. In session 3.4, I think, in the draft, when you explain Quick Block 2, you introduce inline this repeat request terminology. That's essentially the case where you're asking back for block number 0.
Yes.
But it is, I mean, are you borrowing this definition from somewhere else? I couldn't find it in the blockwise RFC.
No, it's just something that came up because there was a challenge of are you just asking for if with block 0 in the standard block 2 case is that you just it's all the block numbers, sorry, the more bit is 0, but it's the issue is that if you only want to ask for one block, you get it when you're using the old block 2. But with the new block 2, if you ask for block 0, you will get the next 10, which may or may not be what you want to get back. And so you have, block, you can identify from block 1 or further blocks that this is a subsequent block that got lost. But how do you handle just that initial block that got lost?
Okay, perhaps you can just expand in line what repeat request can mean, because then I think the examples don't cover that exact value of the Quick Block 2 option. You never miss a block 0 of a response. So,
yep. So we can update the text to include that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess it concludes your presentation on this topic,
sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Any more comments? Anyone? Okay. Now we have plenty of time left for the next item.
Okay. Yeah, I need to actually duck out and go somewhere else. But thank you guys for listening, and especially thank you for all the excellent positive feedback that you've come back with. Much appreciated.
Thank you, John. Okay, we can switch to the resource directory topic then, and especially the latest discussion we've had mostly yesterday on the usage of the anchor attribute. So Christian, floor is yours.
Just because my screen sharing has traditionally not worked in WebEx, could you maybe call up the document that I just linked in the minutes? It's not much. It's just basically quick slides for the topics that I'd like to talk about.
Yeah, just scroll the minutes. Right. Almost sharing. Here we go. You
Thank
see?
you.
Sure.
Okay, on top of the things that we discussed last time, ESCO has been as kind as to throw in a bunch of review comments. Most of them are just finding small mistakes that have persisted in the document. There's one good point about the necessity of anchor, though, and there's been a bit of back and forth. And long story short, of all those interpretations that are floating around for 6690, which does leave some room for ambiguity, but probably has a right interpretation somewhere. The decision we took in 2018 basically was to expand everything at lookup because you could interpret things this or that way. The discussion with ESCO has shown me that basically the only implementation and the only interpretation that necessitated this particular insertion of the anchor under all conditions was my own interpretation. So I know it's rather late in the process, and that was also part of my original response. If chairs and group think that it's too late to do anything about this, and we are saying that we have that it's hard to interpret and we have different implementations that do all those things, I'm fine with leaving it as is. But at the same time, I'd hate for my own mistake to kind of blow up every response to a resource directory request by a factor of 2, which is not precisely that, but pretty close. So especially with long host names, it can easily, or ports, it can easily be that a response is almost twice as long if we serve it with the response anchors. Yeah. So what do we do about this? The two ways. So I think that the only two ways forward are to say that not all of this may be necessary, but there is this wiggle room, and there have been those interpretations, and this is why we keep it. Or to go through the precise resolution steps one more and kick out the necessity of inserting an anchor along with precise rules as they are now, but different rules that say when you need to expand the anchor. This would not render any existing resource directory non-compliant. It would just make the lookup smaller for resource directories that decide to follow that update.
The email that I remember, the suggestion was if rel is not present, then anchor is allowed, and if it is, no, sorry,
yeah,
was it the other way around? Yeah,
so,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that was a suggestion which I did not put in here in this detail because I think that the only reason this there is no implementation and no interpretation of the resolution rules where this really makes a difference. And the only one that needs the anchor in there is mine of 2018, and if that goes away, even those additional rules about href, so the more rules don't make it easier, and they don't make the payload smaller, and
yeah.
So it's more about if we do a change, then we can do the full change that is enabled by kicking the 2018 interpretation.
So whatever we do, making things depend on an interpretation of rel sounds about the wrongest possible that we can do. I mean, looking retroactively, if we were still in 2012 and could rediscuss the rules that are in section 2.1 of RFC 6690, actually looking at the relationship might have been a good way to avoid that complexity. but I mean, we have to live what's in there right now. And I think the rule should be put in the anchor unless you don't need it.
Yeah.
And now the question is the interpretation of section 2.1 of RFC 6690 sufficiently stable that we can state when you don't need it? And there's a little bit questionable in the 2.1b, where it says when specified. It's not entirely clear that this is really well defined, but I think we can explain this a little more. And I don't know how much variation is between implementations about that. But other than that, obviously the implementation of A is irrelevant here, because if the anchor is there, it's there. So we are only looking at B and C, and we can find out what implementations do about these two cases.
Yep.
So on the other thing I wanted to say is that internally, inside a resource directory implementation, the only correct way to implement this is to expand the anchor in the database. Because what you will in the end send back to a lookup client, it's hard to predict that. And the decision whether to include the anchor or not should be based on what you actually send back to the client.
I don't think that storing the fully expanded anchor is practical in the implementation, because the base might change in the course of an update. But the anchor, I think that the simplification also, if we go that route, I'll go through the implementations I looked at in 2018 all again. And I think that what will come out of it is that the anchor either is necessary or is not necessary to include. And then either that relative anchor can be stored, or it or no anchor is stored.
Yes, but I think the important part, what you're talking about is an optimization. I'm talking about the principle. The important part is that the resource directory always behaves like it had stored the anchor.
It behaves like it had stored the anchor in its original form. It does not behave like it stored the anchor in its resolved form, because the resolution base can change when the base changes.
Yes. I agree with that.
I'm sorry, just a stupid question, but I mean, when performing lookup, the response will be a resolved anchor or not? I didn't get that. My understanding is that if even if you register in this new proposal in the small compressed way, when you do a lookup, you will get an anchor to that, or will you get the same thing that was stored during the registration?
This change would allow the resource directory to not return an anchor at all, because the implicit anchor, by following the rules of 6690, is already evident from the rest of the message.
Yes.
Okay.
And it would also allow a resource directory to look at the anchor and invent a relative URI that, in the context that the response is given, resolves to the anchor that it wanted to send.
In principle, yes.
Yes. Not saying that everybody needs to implement that. I'm just saying you have license to do so.
Not even sure if there is any use case for that, but yes.
So nothing would be broken, overhead would be reduced. Any downside in doing this change?
Yes, I'll have to explain to the IESG or whoever has reviewed this that we have done another change that was not on the original list of complaints.
It probably needs a very big disclaimer in the write-up also. So it's more procedural downsides. Question is if it's worth it. I lean it for a yes.
Yeah, I think we are all. I also lean to yes, of course. This is much simpler, and you save a lot of bandwidth on the response. So why not?
For the document, Christian, I think you mentioned it would be about giving clarification in the appendix about limited link format and fixes to your implementation, but I guess that's under control.
Yes, so I mean, we already have a place where we kind of go through the existing rules in a tutorial fashion already. That's Appendix B. And we have a place where we outline what we do in excess of the 690 requirements to get all the implementations in line as Appendix C. So of course they would get updates, but it's not like there's anything completely new that needs adding.
Right. And during the discussion on the list, not to mention today, I haven't heard any big objection anyway in proceeding. And sure, it's late, but seems just in time to me, actually.
Fortunately, people are used to the RD extending its deadline a bit by now.
So once more than hard that much.
So if there's no more comments on this topic, if you could go back to the slides, I'd just like to go through the other open points again.
It was just one slide, by the way, right?
No, you can page up, page down to go to the next.
Okay. You're absolutely right. So I share again.
So so there's two topics that are left over from last time that just needed group action. One is the topic of server authorization, where this originally came from the question about how bad is it if someone puts in a statement into the resource directory about someone who is not the registrant. And turns out this is the same topic we have with the unauthenticated discovery. So Michael, you commented last time that OAuth basically, because of all this suite of problems that could certainly be solved in a more elegant way, just recommends to only run a single service on one host or at behind one authority. Do you have any point?
I don't have a reference for that, but that's what I've observed in the field. So I would have to dig through the OAuth documents to see if it actually says that. It's just what I observe in the field is that basically is that you effectively, because of you can't really send different cookies in your browser to different places, and so they solve that by not having more places.
But we don't have cookies.
No, but
yeah, yes, I understand that, but you still have OS core contexts, right? So, which is effectively the same thing in terms of they go to a particular place, not by resource.
We have a token with a set of claims associated to an OS core context, or a TTLS context for that matter, and that set and nothing in the request limits the set of claims either from the client nor on the server down to what the client actually intends with this request. So the way forward I see here are two in parallel. One is to say that implementations have to be careful here, especially you should probably do as people do in OAuth, unless you have better control of the issue, and in parallel follow up with something that allows us to get better control. But there's a mailing list thread on that, and I'd appreciate if people could comment on that, or of course not.
I think we have to distinguish between the aspect that OAuth implementations have run into all kinds of problems and therefore contain a body of knowledge that we want to make use of, and the properties of OAuth itself, because OAuth is kind of on the way out, and we have to make sure that we can work with whatever is going to replace it.
I'm not following OAuth too closely. What does this mean for ACE? I mean, as I understand, ACE is largely doing taking the semantics of OAuth but putting them into the core area. So does this mean ACE might be on the same way out, or does this mean that we have the chance to do something better with ACE and survive OAuth?
Well, Michael just sent the reference to GNAP or NAP, depending on how you want to pronounce it. So this is one working group that does something that might be replacing OAuth. But in the ACE working group, we have had a long-standing battle about whether the OAuth model was even right for IoT, and it's certainly right for certain kinds of IoT. But there is a whole area that is not being addressed by OAuth, where the OAuth people kind of assumed in 2000, when did we decide that, 2017, that it might grow into that, but that hasn't happened. And now we have GNAP and other proposals of this kind. So I would expect that ACE will be rechartering to pick up some of this work at some point in time. But for now, we just should make sure that resource directory is not married to OAuth. So if we have a different authentication model, and by the way, the standards that depend on CoAP mostly have their own authorization model, so they are not using OAuth either. So we should be able to work with all of them.
Olaf, the other reindeer. So, Christian, I think that the goal here is that was to learn from OAuth, not to cite it. So whether or not ACE adopts it or replaces it, I don't think that exactly matters. I'm not sure, but your example 2 in your email on that thread, with the temperature becoming the time, it's kind of interesting, but it depends upon a malicious RD operator, and I was trying to understand that and the relationship to the other kind of issues. So that's where I'm kind of a bit lost here myself. I think that it's just, yeah, I don't know. I don't understand the relationships that's happening here.
The two, so we face what I perceive as the same problem in two sides. The one side is we present the resource directory as an optimization, basically as something better, something more efficient than as an efficient cache of requesting to multicast, basically, which implies that the resource directory should not really be trusted, at least in some applications, to present correct information about the registrants, and then applications might still look into there and base their decisions on what to send where on the output of the resource directory. And the same kind of problem comes up when the client tries to find the resource directory and might be redirected to something that is a resource directory, but just the wrong point in it, which is basically the same problem, just a step earlier.
So if we could solve the problem that the resource directory is essentially relaying untrusted information by adding some trust to the information that the resource directory couldn't change, then that would also solve the second problem of having to put some trust in the resource directory, because then we could simply, it could be whatever, wouldn't matter, right? That's what I'm hearing. that we're caching
Not-
statements that don't include identities?
I don't know. So one way forward here is to ask the client in all situations to verify that whichever information gets mangled into that request that eventually gets sent come from an entity that is trusted with that to the necessary amount to that request. Thing is, we have different ways of achieving that, and A, we have to pick one in the discovery, and B, we'll have to recommend something to application authors. We can be a bit squishy on the recommendation side, but we have to say something about how to discover an RD.
Well, part of the issue is that, you know, rd.example.com, we have no real way, or time.example.com, we have no way of mapping that to an identity to know if it was really even stated for them. That's what's coming down. If the resource directory simply cached identity XYZ said blah blah blah, then it would always be up to the client to say, well, that's not a valid identity according to my system. It doesn't matter if it's cached or not. It's just untrusted.
Yeah, but
right?
we can't associate that information, especially not in a signed way, with the information in a link format. So that would be kind of.
I realize that. That's the problem. I think that's the problem, is that this link format is just not really helpful.
And even if we could, that would, I mean, there are probably ways to do even directory services for this, but this would wind up with some kind of, I mean, if the resource directory is not in the part of the trust chain, as it should not be, then this would basically give us individually signed links and so on, so that the RD could pass them on efficiently, or some kind of molecular trees or what or not, but it's at least it makes things a whole lot more complicated. And one easy way out is for the client to go to the original authority and ask whether the properties that are fed into the later operations are actually as they were claimed. This is probably okay in the RD discovery process, because it means that's only one rare case when the client has to send another request. But for applications that depend on the RD, that might easily double their discovery traffic. So it's an easy way out for RD, and I'm leaning towards taking that. But this doesn't really say anything about what we should tell the RD users.
So I guess you have more slides, Christian, right? Following this one.
Yes, if we still have time. I mean, kind of bit backup slide. Yeah, then next one, please. So another thing we talked about last time is that we can't really ensure that the requests arrive at the resource directory in a sorted way, which is basically coming from the comments about replay protection. So the trouble one would have if requests to the RD could be replayed extend even beyond replay. What we talked about last time was that echo would be an option to mitigate that. Reading the original code specification again, I found that even eTag might be an option, because there is this great thing called the tagged representation in there that would basically allow us to even associate an eTag with the state of the registration. and then just ask the client to send that E tag again as an if match. And then we would get basically the same thing as with Echo, just that it's nicely scoped to the resource rather than being a thing between the client and the server. So the current pull request, and as discussed last time, I've made this into a pull request first so that we have actual text to talk about, shows the 2.5 options we have for this. One is using Echo, the other is ETag, and the half option is only good against deletion. That is the resource directory picking different registration resources each time a device comes back. So it's at best a partial solution. The thing that's holding back the ETag approach, which I generally would prefer, is that I'm not sure whether it's conceptually okay for the server to say that precondition failed if the client didn't even send an ETag, so that in effect the server would be asking the client, hey, send this with if match that ETag or else I won't accept it. And the other question is if it can send the current ETag with that error response so that the client can, in the event of desynchronization, properly resume the registration. If those two hold, and Carsten, you're probably best qualified for that because you were one of the original authors, then we might manage to do this without ETag, which saves us without Echo, which saves us a normative dependency, and generally is using the concept that is in, say, more regular cases where the client puts something somewhere and then changes it by putting something else there, as it would be using the same mechanism.
Yeah. So essentially, we are saving the normative dependency by inventing something else that can be used in its place.
I'm not sure are we inventing something? I mean, that's what ETag is largely for, isn't it?
Well, ETag is mostly there so a client can verify that a cached representation is still useful.
Okay, yeah, that too.
And yeah, so giving more application semantics to if match is certainly a questionable thing.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that we absolutely cannot do this, but I think we should be really certain of what we are doing here and whether it has the right consequences. And I haven't thought about this very much yet. The other thing, sending an ETag in a precondition failed response is certainly interesting.
Okay.
We may not want to use the precondition failed, we may want to use something else.
But still.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to read that stuff.
Okay.
This means next item.
Yeah, but that's basically the rest just needs me pouring a few more days into that. So yeah, that's basically the last pull request. Carsten has already put in some valuable stuff in there. So if someone else could also do that, it might help. Just because this is something where a lot of new text is going in without having the benefit of the several iterations that the rest had.
Right. Seems things are wrapping up well. Anyway, Christian. Okay, I guess this concludes all your overview on open points on the RD, right?
Yes.
So I just have a question. At a previous meeting, I brought up making Christian the first author on this document. Are we done with that? Is that decision taken?
Yes, that's going to happen.
Thank you.
We bike shed probably a bit the exact meaning of editor. It can be ambiguous if editor is greater than author or not. But
yeah, but if Christian is happy with that, I think everybody else should be happy with that, and we can just do it.
Right. So yes, Christian, go ahead with that too.
Thank you.
Submission, sure. I had a side question for Karsten, by the way, about the status of the CoreConf write-ups.
Yes. If anybody knows how to reach Ivailo, please tell me.
Is he not responsive to mails?
No.
Okay.
I think he simply doesn't see my emails. There must be something about my emails that makes Ivailo system drop them, because in other groups, for instance in COSI, it seems that he never saw my messages when replying to other messages. So it might be a technical problem. So if you guys could maybe ask him what's going on, that would help.
Yeah, thanks for saying. I can reach out to him, ask him to send you a mail, and probably that will start working. Or otherwise, I can recommend other channels. He used to be often on Jabber, but since IETF 108 or so, he stopped.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but okay, I'll give it a try, Karsten, and come back to you.
Yeah. He hasn't been on Telegram for a while either, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Isn't this whole instant messaging thing all moving towards metrics anyway?
Is it?
It depends on whom you ask.
Well, I think leading terrorists still recommend Telegram.
I wish people would go back to Jabber, but that's lost hope.
Or
By the way, have you tried LinkedIn? And that usually gets an answer no matter what.
Okay.
Anyway, I sent him an email. Let's see if he replies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jaime. Is this about final feedback on open points on the drafts, I guess?
Yeah, I need some answers to be able to complete the write-ups.
Okay.
And yeah, okay, that's for the core, right?
Hey, actually, I have some. I was just checking LinkedIn. So Ivailo now is a software engineer at Google since August. So probably the Aclio email is not working if you're trying that.
Ah. Okay.
Yeah. So
Thank you.
might, yeah, you might want to try LinkedIn or something else.
Yeah. Thank you.
No problem.
Is the new address in the drafts?
I have no idea.
Or I wonder if the drafts are still using the old one of Aclio. Okay, but you wrote him to him already. Good. Okay.
Just a quick question about CoreConf. Are there good public implementations about that anyone could recommend? Because I might need to have a look into that at some point, and an implementation is always a good point to start.
That's also something to ask to Eva, probably.
Okay, thanks.
So
Okay.
Ivailo sent a message to the COSI mailing list 48 hours ago. That came from Ivailo at Aclio.
Well, I mean, if you check the LinkedIn, I mean, it's there. So
Okay.
maybe he's using both.
We'll solve this mystery.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yeah, sorry, Marco, I was closing the meeting for you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, well, someone left already. But yeah, if there's no other points to discuss that anyone wants to raise, I think we can close the meeting. We have one more interim. We don't have out of our heads big topics in queue to discuss. So of course, let's keep the interim scheduled till the last moment. But we may eventually cancel that one if nothing exactly to discuss.
I'm sure there will be enough little items we want to discuss about resource directory and other things.
Let's see what happens around the cutoff.
Yeah, you'd be nice to.
Much.
I wonder if we can make it some nice announcement during the next IETF, like ISG having enough time to review the latest version of RD. I don't know how long it usually takes them for these kind of secondary reviews or third. Is it the secondary, the third one?
It's strictly proportional to the time you need to process the first round of comments, because the ISG has to read so many documents that the knowledge about what happened just falls out of the cache over time. So the longer you wait in submitting a new version, the longer the processing of that will take. And that's why it's sometimes a good idea to even submit a new version that only addresses part of the comment, so the cache is refreshed.
Yeah, I'll keep that in mind.
Yes, let's refresh their cache. Cool.
Okay, if there's nothing else, then we can close the meeting. And
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.